welcome to Voices for Energy Justice, a podcast series produced by Uniting the Central Coast for Action, a program of the San Luis Obispo Climate Coalition.
Shalonda Baker's visionary book, Revolutionary Power, provides two critical insights. One, we cannot address climate change without also taking on environmental justice. Two, the powers of the status quo will try to divide climate activists and the energy justice community. Overcoming this is the key to achieving the energy future we all deserve.
Two College Corps fellows inspired this podcast series and will be our hosts for the first two episodes. Listen in as they interview one energy justice leader from the community.
We really do need a stronger and more justice-oriented government to be doing its job in regulating the investor-owned utilities.
Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of Voices for Energy Justice. My name is Riley Chase.
And I'm Maya Petrovic.
We're super excited to be joined with a very special guest for this first episode, Alexis Sutterman.
After having graduated Chapman University with a bachelor's degree in political science, having earned a number of awards and honors, Alexis went on to tackle 5 years of environmental justice and policy work, leading people-powered initiatives to expand clean energy access and benefits for frontline communities. She is currently working as a senior policy manager at Brightline Defense, an environmental justice organization in San Francisco focused on advancing clean energy and air quality policy with a dedication to empower communities and achieve sustainable environments. When we initially met Alexis, she was working as an energy program manager at the California Environmental Justice Alliance, or CEJA. Here, she had been a key leader in campaigns to retire fossil fuel gas plants in disadvantaged communities, to advance clean energy, including community solar, and to pursue progressive rate reform and energy affordability. Everyone that we have talked to while doing this project has had glowing things to say about you, Alexis. You have truly made a mark in the realm of environmental equity and continue to carve the way for future leaders in environmental justice. Alexis Sutterman, thank you for being here and welcome to Voices for Energy. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm doing well today. I just had a little bit of a matcha latte, so getting a little bit of my caffeine fix. And today in Sacramento, it's actually in the 80s, which is really, really nice compared to the last few days that were in the hundreds. So I can't complain.
Oh, wow.
Amazing. Yeah, we're so happy that you're here. And I'm super excited for the conversation that we're going to have. You mentioned to me that you were inspired by a particular Zapatista mantra. I was wondering if we could start off with you sharing with our audience its meaning and how you integrate it into your work.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's something that I love to always come back to. I actually learned about the Zapatista movement in undergrad, as a lot of us kind of have our political awakening at the time and kind of radicalization from some wonderful professors, and finally diving into the history of different liberation movements in different parts of the world. The Chiapas, the Zapatistas in Mexico have a kind of a mantra that is, they're saying that they kind of like to share out in their revolutionary efforts is that otro mundo es posible, and that translates to another world is possible. And I have like posters of that everywhere that I can't, or just like little I like to have art from the Zapatista movement kind of inspire me in my work. And to me, it's it's a simple saying, but it's also just a reminder that the world that we grew up in and that we feel like is sort of fixed is actually something that's been created through a lot of different individual and collective choices over time. And so we actually have the agency to make new choices or reshape our own collective futures together and create another kind of world here together that can look a lot different and feel a lot better for the majority of people and for the environment. So that is something that I kind of like to go back to in my work.
I love that and how meaningful it is and how you're able to connect that to your work. I want to dive a little more into what drives you with your work. Can you share how you got your footing in environmental justice? And was it something you always saw yourself doing?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Orange County, and for those familiar with kind of the California landscape, I grew up in sort of the northern part of Orange County, so like Westminster, Anaheim area, and Growing up, I definitely could felt like that was, again, kind of like you grow up and you feel like this is the world, this is my bubble is the world. But even just driving, what's so funny in our world right now is you can just drive like 10 minutes or 15 minutes and then you're in, Newport Beach, or you're in Irvine, or you're in Laguna Niguel, and Southern Orange County. And it's funny how your zip code can just drastically change your living conditions of like, oh, now there's green space, and now there's a Trader Joe's. I've never seen a Trader Joe's growing up. It's different kinds of like access that you don't have when you are in a more kind of lower income neighborhood. And I think that did kind of shock me growing up, is just seeing that you can have a drastically different experience in terms of like, what you're next to, and the different, I didn't really understand the pollution aspect at the time, but just also, now also seeing how different levels of like highway pollution, and just that lack of green space can really impact somebody. And so that was kind of just the more visceral kind of introduction to environmental justice without me even knowing the term or the phrase or the movement. But I really started to put the pieces more together in college, is really when I started to, again, like dive into history, dive into the current kind of political status of things, and also took some really cool political theory and kind of philosophy classes that also really opened my eyes. And I think that, again, having been able to take some of those courses and learn from some professors that were really starting to show me how things have been constructed over time really got me to see what we have the agency in shaping. And I think I always go back to one thing my professor had said once is, when you think about how things have happened over time, perhaps instead of thinking this is an like this kind of like catastrophe and some of the issues that we're seeing, instead of seeing it as like inevitable, as like this is just the way that humans are because we're chaotic, or whatever you may think, you may actually start to take a step back and notice how some of these were intentionally designed by certain actors that do have kind of a profit motive, or other logics that are kind of underpinning their own efforts to kind of exploit and extract the natural world. And that includes communities of color and low-income communities. And so that did really shock me, because I never had the impression that there may actually be some intentionality behind the war and crisis. And that made me realize, again, like there's so much we can do actually to start to shift that narrative and really kind of have a paradigm shift away from that. And so I started to search for a framework that could kind of like tie these pieces together more so for me. And that's actually when I got introduced to environmental justice, because I was really searching for a movement that was tying together the root causes of the climate crisis, and showing how they connected to the root causes of war and poverty and other humanitarian issues. And I really found that in the environmental justice movement, which is dedicated to systems transformation, and that requires stopping the bad, building the new, and changing the rules, which to me felt very exciting as someone about to graduate college and wanting to kind of find my place in the world.
Thank you for sharing your journey. I especially appreciated you speaking about how like having your bubble popped, and like recognizing as a kid, like, oh, like these, maybe lower income places, they aren't as nice, there aren't as many green spaces. Then you go to college, and I feel like I can relate to that. I took courses and I learned, I'm like, oh, like there's actual intention behind this, like this was done purposefully. And being shocked and like that kind of being taken aback really drives, I think, a lot of us to like want to do something about it, and drives us forward. So yeah, I really appreciate your journey and your explanation. Thank you. For our listeners who aren't as familiar with the concept, would you mind explaining what energy democracy is and how it relates to environmental justice?
Yeah, definitely. And again, like the environmental justice movement, to just start out, it, as I mentioned before, is really about transforming society. And so that differs from kind of traditional environmentalism, or the kind of historical environmentalist movement, which was really focused on, combating climate change, protecting kind of natural land, like far away, like protecting the mountains and protecting the whales. And I think environmental justice really starts to take a place-based approach. And it doesn't say those things are not important, because those things are extremely important. And environmental justice advocates fight for that too. But it's also, the environmental justice movement says, our environment isn't just, these mountains far away. They're actually like, the neighborhoods we're growing up in, and this, our schools, our own neighborhoods and our communities are also our environment, because we as humans, that we're part of the environment, and we are one animal that is part of the animal kingdom. And so I think that part is really grounding as a movement to say, all of the environments around us need to be protected, not just the ones that are kind of accessible to wealthier households. And so when we talk about energy democracy and how that kind of fits into the picture, the energy, again, with like kind of traditional environmentalists, the concept is like, well, we have to switch from dirty fossil fuel energy to clean energy. And that is the priority. And again, we take a both and approach. We as kind of EJ and energy democracy advocates, we say, yes, that is extremely important. And that shift actually gives us the opportunity to shift also from kind of a corporate centralized fossil fuel economy to a more kind of like socialized community-based energy system that is designed on the principle of do no harm to the environment or to communities, that is actually supporting and uplifting local communities and integrating them into all channels of the decision-making process of our energy system. And of course, overall, the energy system should be in the service of our health and well-being as humans, and also as any living being on the environment or in the environment. So it really does take it a step further. And I think that sometimes has had some contentiousness, or sometimes there could be rifts between those that are kind of, we call them climate fundamentalists sometimes, or folks that only care about greenhouse gas reductions, and that's it. And you can see them sometimes partnering with like really corporate clean energy industry that can be very kind of corporate minded. And so perhaps they're fully trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at all costs. But for us, it's kind of like, well, we can do this while also shifting the kind of the power from the industry and investor-owned utilities, and kind of bringing some power back to actual local communities. And we think that shouldn't hinder any immediate action on climate. And actually, this is the perfect opportunity to be kind of tackling all these issues at once for the energy system. So that is kind of the vision for energy democracy, is really contributing to and propping up a people-powered economy that is in the service of human life and the people.
Thank you for explaining that. Maya and I have both talked about how your explanations are so well defined and so easy to consume, and we really appreciate that. We do want to get into what you were saying about how this energy democracy can uplift communities, but before we do, I keep finding myself looking back on your definition of sacrifice zones, and I think this is a really important concept to understanding localized impacts. Can you briefly describe or explain what a sacrifice zone is to the audience?
Yeah, definitely. So this term comes from just the understanding that we've had legacies of environmental racism and neglect, and that's there's so much evidence of that in terms of our land use policies, segregation. There's been a lot of very, very explicit neglect in terms of even funding or access to a lot of different programs, green space, and again, the intentional kind of siting of fossil fuel plants and other really harmful toxins, putting those in the neighborhoods that the government knows they don't have the resources to fight back on those projects. And so that's why it's no surprise that more than half of our gas plants in California are actually located in the top 25% most disadvantaged communities, as identified by Cal EPA. So you see high concentration of these kind of really toxic and harmful fossil fuel infrastructure and gas plants, oil refineries, biogas production, all these are highly concentrated in the communities that have the least resources and are the most vulnerable to climate change. So it's just extremely, ironic and really it leads to a situation in which these communities are facing these cumulative pressures, because it's not just economic pressures, but then they're also breathing in the worst and dirtiest air. And this is why, we use the term sacrifice zones, because of course all this energy that was all this energy generation, like these facilities that were cited and developed, were all, in theory, they're all for the public good of, contributing to our energy system, so that all of us can turn on the light and all of us can use our fridge, right? Like these are all the things we needed. And at the time, perhaps there wasn't all this clean energy innovation. But again, just to call them sacrifice zones, because basically they are we're sacrificing them so that all of us here in the state can have energy. And now in the shift to clean energy, even there's still some big issues where some allegedly clean energy resources are now being cited also in these communities, although they're clean in the sense that they're cleaner than oil and gas, because they have less greenhouse gas emissions, but they still actually have a lot of local air pollution. And so that's another case of sacrificing these communities for the climate. It's like we're moving ahead on climate, but we're actually still contributing a lot of harm and pollution in these underserved regions. So yeah, that's kind of why we call them that.
Thank you for clarifying that. Kind of exactly where you were headed. Can you expand a little bit on how the transition to a clean energy system can help uplift these communities and help them build resilience against climate change while ensuring that the sacrifice zones aren't perpetuated?
Yeah. So I think this is what has made me the most excited about the kind of clean energy transition. And I think Shalonda Baker and like a lot of other great leaders on this, on kind of thinking about clean energy and energy justice have done a great job articulating, is that this is the perfect opportunity that we have right now in a lot of ways to really uplift disadvantaged communities and build resilience. Because since we have to make so many changes in our energy system and pretty much overhaul the way we've done energy thus far, which is again extracting, burning, dumping, right? All these really extractive practices, we have to completely change that. And although clean energy infrastructure, there are still many hurdles to get through to ensure we are minimizing harm. It's still an entirely new set of facilities. It's a new set of infrastructure we have to build out, and that gives us the opportunity to rethink how we build it out, and the processes, the siting, and also some of the other benefits that can come from the clean energy development. And so if we really have justice-oriented lens, this gives us the chance to actually make it so that it's not only or solely or mostly investor-owned utilities and industry that are benefiting, but rather actual local communities that get to really benefit from this shift to clean energy. And so I think, as we look at how much clean energy we have to build, which is a lot in order to meet our climate goals and to meet SB 100, which is to get to 100% clean and renewable energy by 2045 in California, we can think about things like community solar and storage, which can share some of the benefits and bring bill savings to local communities, while also helping to retire local gas plants that are currently sited in disadvantaged communities. We can also think about things like there's a lot of movement on the offshore wind possibilities in California, and while that has its own set of we need to still study and ensure that we're doing it right, and working with local communities and tribes to get it right. And if we can, that is an opportunity to also think about community benefits agreements with the local community, so that there's actual agency and power in the community near the facility to think about what they want and need from this development. And that could look like, local workforce opportunities and local good paying jobs. Can also look like, even wanting a new library, or, so it's like there's so much revenue that can come from these projects, and it's important to think about revenue sharing with the local community. So those are just a couple examples, but overall there is a lot of excitement on really making it so that this transition is something that is really showing up in people's lives in a positive way, rather than just, the legacies we've had before, where it's just extractive, harmful, and polluting.
What you're saying is so inspiring because, like you said, like we're in a pivotal point where we do have to redo the energy system, and like now this is the perfect opportunity to put these frontline communities as a priority, and ask them what they need and make sure that everyone's needs are met, which is the definition of sustainability if we're thinking about it for all people. But obviously, like for this to successfully be implemented, we need a lot of good policy and a lot of good policy leadership, to like ensure that this is like done well. The organization that you previously worked for, SEHA, it was pretty instrumental in mobilizing people to California's capital during critical policy junctures. Can you share any examples of the biggest challenges that you faced at SEHA, or like in terms of like its efforts to significant policy change?
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely a lot of challenges. So with great opportunity also comes great responsibility, and also a lot of challenges. And I don't think these are unique to SEHA, but I would say a lot of these challenges are things that a lot of leaders and advocates in the environmental justice movement generally are facing right now, and even our partners in the environmental movement as well. I think so. I think one of them, and especially unique to justice-oriented groups, is that we still, we live in a primarily market capitalist economy, and it's still premised on this, notion of economic growth, and, a lot of insider knowledge on kind of markets and the supply chain of different resources. So there's just a lot of very market-driven metrics that are used in our current, agencies, the legislature, just all over. And so I think that that can be a challenge sometimes, because even the ways that we account for different energy resources can still not show the full picture. And so sort of like how the gross domestic product GDP like hides externalities, like we have very similar things happening with our cost benefits analyses within the state agencies. And we'll often see that decisions get made based on something being more cost effective, but really it's actually, not taking into account the cost of human life, of hospital visits, and to that point, it's kind of like, okay, if it's cheaper to leave a gas plant online, but your neighborhood and your grandparents are getting asthma from it, or your kids are growing up with higher chances of bronchitis, it's like how does our decision making not actually reflect the human reality to things? And it is still very much based off of this kind of market approach. And so we're facing some of those battles right now, but there is some movement underway to really get the state to look at non-energy benefits and social costs, which is basically just, the fuller picture of what are the full costs and benefits of different decisions, and looking at the full life cycle impact of the resources. So not only how much pollution it's producing like right at the end of its life, but like really to extract the material, to transport it, all of those different pieces, like really trying to see the full picture of what it's doing, so that we're making informed decisions and we're not just hiding, it's kind of like throwing all the clothes under your bed and saying you cleaned your room, but there's a mess. And so we're really trying to like sharpen up our metrics, because that has been a barrier to getting anything passed, really. Even like getting community solar program passed was a huge barrier, because the California Public Utilities Commission is basically saying it's going to be too expensive to create a program like this. But really, again, they're not thinking about things more holistically. And there's ways to reform the rate system to make it so that it's not so expensive to get the things that we need. We just need a more progressive kind of rate design, and have the wealthier pay their fair share. So that's one key barrier. I'll just name, one or two more. Another one that, is kind of a recurring issue, is that there are a lot of technical and resource constraints within community-based organizations. And generally, in terms of philanthropy, I think it has been a bit harder to get dedicated funding for bottom-up organizing. And so although a lot of our, organizations that are environmental justice focused really abide by the Hermes principles of, bottom-up organizing and kind of grassroots movement building, it is hard to get enough funding to really do that justice. And so there's always just capacity constraints within environmental justice organizations. And so that's just something that's been kind of a perpetual problem, given the fact that, a lot of our industry partners or non-partners definitely have a lot more money and connections and expertise in some of these energy issues. And so sometimes, we do partner on that, like with the clean energy industry, we do partner with them on a number of things. And I think that could be a productive relationship, but it would be, I think it's always a hurdle and a barrier to think about how we stay committed to community-driven, community-driven policy agendas with just not having, enough of that organizing capacity. So something we just continue to grapple with and do the best we can. And then third, I would say, this is something that is not unique to California, but we're definitely seeing it a lot in California, is just the kind of complexity of the issues we're talking about, paired with the lack of coordination across agencies and different stakeholders on things. And that just becomes really difficult because there can be like so many CPUC proceedings on related issues, and and at the same time, then there's the Energy Commission that's looking at its own scope. And while they're all supposed to be kind of connected and coordinated, I think, that's always been a struggle to really know like who's doing what. That becomes a question. I think there's like a Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other because they don't, like, I don't know, they're trying to avoid responsibility, or they're just saying like, oh, it's supposed to be you, it's supposed to be you. And that's kind of what we joke about sometimes with the California agencies. It's just like, we don't know who's in charge of what, and there really isn't that strong coordination. And even in terms of plans that get created, like the offshore wind strategic plan was recently released, a draft version, and it's going to be voted on soon. But a lot of people are concerned that it's not really a plan. It's just like a bunch of different options, but there isn't a clear sense of, this agency has to do this role and by this timeline. We really just need some more strong signals and clarity from our administration. But unfortunately, we often don't see that, and it kind of delays things, or it doesn't really, it isn't a plan that succeeds in implementing the things we're trying to pass. And so that's also been, a big barrier to actually moving forward on the issue, on the clean energy resources we need to retire fossil fuel plants. So yeah.
You mentioned the Hermes principle. Can you just explain what that is quickly?
Yeah, these are like the Hermes principles are kind of like democratic principles for bottom-up organizing. I believe they were they were kind of compiled by a meeting that was hosted by the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice in New Mexico in 1996. And they are something that a lot of EJ organizations kind of look to as a core principles for being, an environmental justice organization, because one of our core principles is to be community led. And so not just kind of creating policies in a vacuum based on what we think is the best approach, like us as, just staff people and policy, but really going back to our bases, our grassroots communities, and making sure that their input is what's driving the policy work that we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. And thank you for all the challenges you shared. I think, like you mentioned, it's just so important for the policy to be holistic, and not just from like in terms of cost, like not just economic, but also the cost to people in their daily lives and communities, but also holistic coordination of all the stakeholders. Like if we aren't all on the same page, how is anything supposed to get done? So thank you for sharing all of that. Hopefully with all the work that you and other leaders in environmental justice are doing, we can see some changes in policy coming soon and in the future. I did want to talk about something we discussed in our previous conversation. You mentioned concerns about hydrogen investments and biogas expansion, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate on those concerns and if you see any alternatives for them.
Yeah, for sure. And So I mentioned earlier that the energy transition is a big opportunity for, disadvantaged communities and for justice-oriented advocates, and just for really the transition to a more justice-oriented energy system. Unfortunately, the energy system is also can be an opportunity for certain industry actors to kind of come in and try to make a lot of money on on different kind of like clean in quotation marks energy sources that actually again aren't fully clean, and perhaps some of these could have had a place in the past, just as if the transition from oil to natural gas was a big jump, and even some states are still not really fully there. Thankfully California has done a lot of that, but point being that there are we're at a point where clean energy technology is quite advanced, and we actually do have a lot of existing resources that are truly clean and that we can rely on and expand. So there really isn't room for things like most types of hydrogen and biogas in our energy system. And unfortunately, there are actors that will try to advocate and for developing a lot of these types of what we call false solutions, even though they are actually contributing to a lot of air and water pollution near low income and environmental justice communities. There is perhaps a small role for truly green hydrogen, which is produced by electrolysis of 100% renewable energy, and that can create green hydrogen. But really, that makes up less than 1% of today's hydrogen production in the US. And so most hydrogen that's produced right now is actually made from fossil fuels, and still contributes a lot of health damaging pollution. So really changing, like kind of converting gas plants to hydrogen plants, which is what what there's a lot of funding for right now, and potential possibilities for right now, that is not really going to get us to the clean future that we need for frontline communities, and will bring a lot of safety concerns. It really is kind of a lifeline to the oil and gas industry, since they know that oil and gas are being phased out, and so they're kind of they're trying to grab onto this as their last lifeline, and something that EJ advocates are fighting really hard for. And again, there can be a role for green hydrogen, a very narrow role for hard to electrify sectors like aviation, long haul trucking and shipping, but really that is a small tailored role, and we shouldn't be seeing this huge transformation to hydrogen for most things. And just to quickly touch on biogas, this is also a false solution in our eyes. Biogas production is something that contributes to a lot of air and water pollution, and it kind of it releases toxic compounds into the air, including benzene. And what we're seeing now is that since biogas facilities can make a lot of money for certain actors, they're actually leading to the way that they make biogas. One way to make biogas, at least there's a few ways, but one is to use dairy manure. And so what they're doing now is actually expanding these huge dairy digesters that are a lot of them in the Central Valley, and because the biogas makes them a lot of money, they're expanding these dairy digesters, and that is a really big threat to kind of Central Valley folks, and a lot of them being like farmers and low income communities and immigrant communities in that area that are exposed to high levels of pollutants from the manure and also from the biogas production. So that's just another area where we don't want to see increased sacrifice zones from already, from communities that are already overburdened by pollution. We don't want to see their living conditions get even worse in our transition to clean energy. So definitely so many alternatives exist that we don't even need to be talking about hydrogen and biogas. There's so much opportunity for solar, community scale solar, large scale solar, offshore wind being a really big hot topic, and a lot of distributed energy resources that can help reduce our energy demands, like energy efficiency, demand response, thinking about resilience like microgrids. So lots of great things to be working on that we don't even need to consider these other false solutions.
I really appreciate that you said all that, because I feel like in sustainability, like when there's a new innovation like hydrogen biogas, people get so excited that this might be like the end all be all solution, and they get super excited and promote it. when in fact it's actually propagating, oil and gas industry. Like you said, it might be a lifeline to them. And it's so important in this field to consider like the entire life cycle and lifetime impact, because yeah, maybe it is super renewable, but what's going to happen in 50 years, 100 years, when that thing can't be, doesn't degrade well or has toxic effects, or after its like operational lifespan, it can no longer work anymore, now it's just polluting. And I just think that's like so critical to be talking about. And I'm really glad you brought that up. I am curious how you would redesign the roles of major players like investor-owned utilities and community choice aggregations to achieve a more equitable system, and what improvements you think are necessary in terms of these major players within the entire energy system.
Yeah, this is the $1 million question for sure. And definitely been thinking about it a lot these days. Definitely don't have the perfect answer to this. And I'm sure there's a lot of smarter people out there that are really doing good work on this, thankfully. But I think, I think just thinking about the energy systems and its overall structure and trying to think about how to kind of increase democracy and justice. I mean, part of it that I'm noticing is we really do need a stronger or more justice-oriented government to be doing its job and kind of regulating the investor-owned utilities. So of course we want to reimagine what the utilities can look like, but as a kind of as a baseline measure, given we have these, utilities in a lot of power right now, the vision for investor-owned utilities was supposed to be, they're regulated monopolies, like in a sense they have some sort of monopoly over their service territory, and then, government, the California Public Utilities Commission in particular, is meant to be that check to make sure, that the way it's operating is producing just and reasonable rates, and that overall they are not, they're not entities that are supposed to be out there just trying to make money off of us. Unfortunately, we're still seeing the investor-owned utilities make a lot of decisions and actions that aren't in the favor of the public. And it's really clear that when you see kind of like PG&E increase its shareholder returns at the same time as rates are skyrocketing triple-fold or so for a lot of residents, it's clear they don't have our best interests at heart, and they really are unfortunately, incentivized by other opportunities and goals that they have for their shareholder returns. And so I think that first point is important, where we need government to actually be looking out for the public and actually holding utilities accountable to making decisions that are in the best interest of the public. That might require some changes too to how the investor-owned utilities even make their money for once. People have floated around the idea of going towards more performance-based metrics instead of just their guaranteed rate of return, because right now they basically make money anytime they build something big. And so they don't really have an incentive to promote things like energy efficiency and demand response, because anything that actually makes it so we use less energy means, they make less money, generally speaking. So there's some mismatch in terms of their incentives and what's good for the public. But in terms of also just like rethinking utilities, and now with the kind of the growth of community choice aggregators, which are, meant to be more accountable to local communities, given they're kind of governed by more local government. Thinking about that overall, it is an important time to be exploring what opportunities there are in public power and, community power and ownership. And that could look, that could be as small scale as just community ownership of a solar facility, which can bring more bill savings and benefits to that community. Or we can think about it like larger scale with like, there's a centralized procurement mechanism right now in DWR, or Department of Water and Resources in California, and they are currently an entity that can procure energy, which is like basically purchase energy to try to lower costs, and that has to do with the cost of offshore wind, and some of these long lead time resources are so they're so costly. So investor-owned utilities, it's harder for them to procure it. And so now there's DWR stepping in to be more of a public entity to try to procure large quantities of energy to lower costs for ratepayers. So that vision, we'll see how it actually gets implemented. But I think the vision is exciting of like, can there be other alternatives to the investor-owned utilities that can actually bring more benefits, more channels for community input, yeah, more of that kind of socialized kind of vision for our energy system. So that'll be, yeah, I think that'll just exploring more of those public power opportunities. Also thinking about Justice 40 and, federal funding, a lot of that being, at least in name, is meant to kind of encourage some more public and community benefits. So there is an opportunity to say, can we put public funding into things that will actually shift responsibilities away from investor-owned utilities. I think, yeah, I think in addition to just exploring those pathways, we still need some important policy changes within the system that we have now to really change and more equitably distribute the costs and benefits. So I guess regardless of whether it's investor-owned utilities or community choice aggregators or like an entirely different type of entity, I think overall we know that as we build out the clean energy we need to combat climate change and to advance environmental justice, it's going to come with an economic cost. Like we can't avoid that. So it's really the question is who's going to pay for that, and from that justice-oriented mindset, it's like can we for once actually put more of the economic burden or cost on those who have really been profiting off of our system for centuries now. And so I think thinking about kind of a reparations framework for rates and energy affordability at large is important. And I think recently there was a decision around income graduated fixed charges that a lot of folks were in our circles are pretty disappointed with, because it's really not as progressive as it needed to be. And what we really do want to see is a system in which at least matching our taxation system, where wealthier ratepayers pay a much higher portion of their electricity rates, so that we can bring bills down for the majority of Californians. But unfortunately, we have not really seen that move in that direction. So that's another, low-hanging fruit to kind of achieve something more equitable. And yeah, I think overall, the last thing I'll say on this is just democracy is hard. There's so many voices, sometimes competing voices, but it's something we have to come back to and stay committed to. So in any decision that we make, whether we're thinking about an investor-owned utility or we're thinking about community choice aggregator, something private, something public, something community-based, regardless of, the vessel, we have to stay committed to bringing in community input and making changes and being flexible and adaptive in the process, and being transparent with the public about what's happening. So I think transparency, accountability, and having kind of that community-driven approach has to be important with any entity that we kind of explore in the energy system.
Thank you so much. That was so much information, so much valuable information. How does Brightline Defense, the organization that you work for, like want to be included in this transition?
In the clean energy transition?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, no, so as I mentioned, Brightline Defense, we're a San Francisco-based environmental justice organization. We have a lot of roots in kind of air quality work in San Francisco, and also local workforce development, like supporting local workforce development opportunities. And so in this moment, we are kind of expanding also our portfolio of policy priorities, and we are excited about, the clean energy transition and thinking about how to do that in an affordable and just way. And I think one of the policy priorities we're kind of diving into, or have dived into staff before me for the last few years, and of course me just diving in this month or so, or last month, really looking at the possibility for just and equitable development of offshore wind in California, and really getting all the pieces right for that. So there's going to need to be massive transmission upgrades, ports, upgrades to our ports, and really thinking about that local community engagement process with offshore wind developers, so that communities are getting the most good and the least bad from these projects, to put it simply. So that's an area we're excited to be looking at. And again, it all kind of ties back to that air quality improvements that are needed in San Francisco and across the state. And it's really thinking like, okay, since we need to electrify our buildings and our cars in order to, improve air quality, what's going to power that? And so I think offshore wind is obviously one key thing that can power that, in addition to like solar and storage, and other clean energy tools in the toolkit.
Thanks so much for sharing. Like I said before, like this is such an exciting time, and your smile when you were talking about that, it just shows like, I don't know, it seems like you're really excited to be working on this too. So yeah, I can't wait to see what Brightline Defense gets up to in the future.
Yeah. And thank you so much for all the insights you've provided. Everything you said is so valuable. And I feel like we learn so much every time we talk to you. Do you have any final thoughts or messages that you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, just one last thought to share is there's clearly a lot of moving pieces in the work, and there's like a lot of uphill battles. But at the same time, I think choosing to be part of the environmental justice movement was one of the best decisions I've made for myself. And it does have, although it comes with its own struggles and moments of kind of grief and cynicism, it also comes with a lot of laughter and creativity and connection with amazing people. So I guess like my pitch on if folks are interested in joining the EJ movement in some way, or even just just doing anything to further liberation and justice, whether it's climate related or not, I think my advice would be to just find an organization that is doing cool work. Follow them on Instagram or something. Just stalk them and try to see if you can become a part of them in some way, whether as staff or volunteering, because there is a lot of work to go around. So we can always use more help.
That's awesome. I think there's so many people who want to get involved and just don't know where to start. So that's really useful, a tip. Well, I think that's all the questions we had for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us again today.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. We're interested in your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. Email us at john@slowclimatecoalition.org. Tell your friends about this podcast series so we can all grow together. Till next time.